Well, good morning. This is Ian R. Crane. It's the morning of Wednesday, the 23rd of January, 2019. They say the sun shines on the righteous. Well, I certainly wouldn't claim to be that. But up until literally about 30 seconds ago, it was absolutely chucking it down here in the southwest of England. But got a brief break in the rain, and does look like there has been a lot of aircraft activity a little bit to the southwest of me, although the sky directly above, actually, apart from a rain cloud, actually seems pretty clear. It's interesting, isn't it, how when I mention the aircraft pollution, how it engenders discussion and debate amongst the wider population, but not amongst the politicians. There's no such thing as aircraft pollution, apparently. Anyway, title of today's broadcast is the UK as dumbed down as the corporatists believe? And they're certainly hoping so, and they're certainly hoping that the politicians are so far detached from their communities that they will actually just believe whatever the corporatists tell them to believe. Well, that part is probably true, because there is little doubt that the political parasites are in a world of their own. And of course, they're desperately trying to protect their cushy lifestyle, where legislation comes out of Brussels, is rubber stamped by the civil service into the statute books of the UK, and the politicians just have to go through the charade of pretending to represent the people. And of course, as we knew all along, David Cameron never for 1 minute believed that he would lose the EU referendum. But he did. And in fact, anecdotally, he lost it by a much bigger margin than is actually officially reported. But the bottom line is, nonetheless, a 72.2% turnout at the polls, the largest turnout of the electorate in modern history. And that vote was very much to get out of the EU. But there seems to be a considerable number of politicians who think that they have the divine right to ignore the vote, to ignore the will of the people, and to try to push ahead with a second referendum. And of course, this has been the case in other countries. And it was pretty much acknowledged that the Irish were just going to have to keep voting until they came up with the right answer, or the ballot could be manipulated to yield the right result. Well, in other countries, of course, they've had the ballot, like France and in the Netherlands, and basically their government said, well, thanks for letting us know what you think, but we don't really care. So, we're just going to plough ahead anyway. Well, the UK, hopefully, is watching what's occurring elsewhere, and particularly in France. And if you want to see how the EU has every intention of keeping its slave race under control, then look no further than what's going on in France right now. And the brutality that is being used by the CRS. They are now walking around with submachine guns, with live ammunition. The number of deaths is certainly well into double figures, although, it's not being widely reported either in the French press or in the British press. And of course, as the BBC have admitted, well, they haven't admitted it, but one of their employees has revealed that the BBC are effectively operating under a D notice not to report on the magnitude of the civil unrest in France. And that protest, the Yellow Vest protest, seems to have sparked a wave right across the world, with Yellow Vest protests occurring as far away as Australia, and in the US, in the Netherlands, in Germany, in Belgium, and in Scandinavia. So, all of these countries, the people are starting to realise that their politicians are not looking after their best interests. They're looking after the interests of the global corporatists. And the global corporatists work on the basis that provided they can keep the middle classes in a lifestyle which just sort of stops them from bitching about their lot, and sort of keeps their attention away from what's occurring with the working classes, as it were, then they're in good shape. And it is only when the middle classes, which I refer to as sort of Middle England, but that goes beyond the middle classes, that's Middle England, that's the 95% or so of the population that don't really give two hoots about the political arena. They just want to get on with their lives. But it's only when the middle classes start to realise that their lifestyle is at risk and under threat that true change actually starts to occur. And that's been the case right through history. And very much in France, and the doctor who released his video from his office in a hospital in rural France a couple of weeks ago, which I dubbed over in the last episode of Humanity vs. Insanity, he makes it very clear that as a doctor, it causes him great distress to see what is happening to the rural communities, to farming communities, to the removal of services in the rural areas, forcing young people to move into the cities, where single family dwellings are now very much, well, I won't say yet the exception, but the trend is very much that single family dwellings are being converted into dormitories, where people are either living out of one room or multiple people living within a room, because that's the only thing that they can afford. So, the trend is such that, right across the world, people are starting to see that, the global corporatists are just seeking to suck vampirically as much of the wealth and the soul of communities into their offshore accounts as they possibly can. So, Jeremy Corbyn, of course, has committed political suicide by basically announcing that, Labour might be prepared to consider a second vote. We've had a vote. At no point was it ever offered that if we didn't get the result that the minority wanted, there would be a second vote. Now, the only upside of that is that although the polls are trying to present that a second vote would be a swing to Remain, I don't think that's the case. And, I'm talking to a lot of people around the country, and, the sense that I get is that obviously those that benefit from, in some way, shape or form, from being in the EU, they want to stay because that's what they know, that's nice and cosy. But the vast majority of people are recognising that actually we need to get out. And in France, the doctor identifies the common agricultural policy as, probably the single element which is destroying the farming community in France. And of course, the Irish farmer turned economist, agricultural economist, Raymond Crotty, tried to point this out to the Irish people and the Irish government back in the 70s. And in fact, it's thanks to Raymond Crotty that the Irish were able to have a further referendum on their participation in the EU. And we know that those referenda were ultimately fixed. We have the video footage of the police surreptitiously carrying extra ballot boxes into the council offices where the count was being made, and there was no way the Irish were going to be let out of the EU, and that's primarily because Ireland, because of its geographical position at the western edge of the European Union, actually has 23% of Europe's, or the EU's fishing grounds, which a corrupt Irish government sold almost all of, 80% of, to the EU for a one-off payment of €6 billion a couple of decades ago. So here in the UK, the politicians are trying to drag things out in the hope that, or the Remainers in the hope they get a second ballot. Well, if it is mooted that there would be a second referendum, a people's vote as they call it, which we've already had, then I predict that there will be massive civil unrest. 17.4 million people voted to get out. The British government has had 2.5 years to prepare for this moment that's coming up in just over a couple of months. And now, of course, they're claiming that, Theresa May's deal, which really wasn't a deal at all, has been rejected, so it's back to the drawing board. Well, if that's the case, so be it. Then, as we've seen more and more around the country, people are just saying, you know what, let's just get out and deal with it. And if our politicians are not up for dealing with it, then they need to step aside and let people come into the frame who are capable, have the intellectual capacity, unlike Theresa May, who is an intellectual pygmy, and as I said right from the get-go, was put into that position to screw this up. That's why she was put into the role of Home Office, because she does what she's told. She's a proven good soldier. Of course, she was the one who managed to keep kicking the child abuse investigation down the road. So much so that, it's well and truly in the long grass right now, as, that disappears into the hinterland and people have other focus. So, keep the pressure on your elected representatives, because if we are held in the EU, then by 2022, basically, thanks to all the various treaties that have been signed to date, the UK will not only no longer exist, but short of a mass uprising, then there will be no possibility of getting out of the EU, and in fact we will start to see the demise of the nation states, the final demise of the nation states right across Europe. So, I think people are starting to realise that they have to get involved, they have to participate, and, if we don't, then, the future that we are condemning future generations to really doesn't bear thinking about. Well, of course, elsewhere, and of course this is all part of the chaos that the establishment wants to create, so that people just dig a hole and stick their head in it and go, oh, let me know when it's all over. Well, it's not going to be all over until people do get involved. And, a classic case of this is fracking. Here we are, over 6 years now since the moratorium was lifted in December 2012, and still not a meaningful frack or a viable frack in the UK in that time. And that is primarily down to communities right across the country stepping up to the plate, and particularly in the north of England. If it wasn't for the communities taking the initiative here and challenging what's rocking up or potentially rocking up in their backyard, then there's no question we would have been seriously fracked, particularly across the north of England. But that isn't happening. And it looks like, Quadrilla are very much on the run. And, of course, they've got their PR people working with the OGA, desperately trying to get the earthquake limit raised. And, of course, just recently we've seen Dr. Brian Bapty of the British Geological Survey and Dr. Ben Edwards of Liverpool University both step into the media limelight claiming, no, it's okay, you can lift the earthquake limit and it's not going to be a problem. But both of these individuals are focusing on what occurs on the surface and not taking account of what's occurring subsurface, and particularly ignoring the potential damage to the well casing, which of course is what led to the seismic events, the significant seismic events being triggered back in 2011 by Quadrilla. But, they're claiming that, well, look, let's look at around the world. Let's look at California, which has an earthquake limit of 2.7, or Canada, which has an earthquake limit of 4. But, we're not comparing like with like, because if we look at the population density of these two areas, I mean, Canada has a population density of 4 people per square mile. And actually, in most of the areas where Canada is fracking, it's a lot less, because they're not fracking around the, in most cases, around the populated areas, certainly not in Alberta and British Columbia. In California, the population density is a little higher. It's 97 people per square kilometre. But again, in California, a significant chunk of the 40 million people who live in that state live in the major cities like LA and San Diego and San Francisco. And, obviously a smattering obviously out in the hinterlands, but it's a lot less than it is in Lancashire, where the population density is 483 people per square kilometre. So Lancashire has a population density that is 5 times greater than California, and over 100 times greater than Canada. So how on earth can a scientist who worth the certificate that hangs on his wall make these claims? Well, it's quite easy really when you're getting funding from the likes of the unconventional gas industry or the Oil and Gas Authority. Although Dr. Ben Edwards would appear to be fairly cheap, seeing as far as I'm aware, the funding that he has got, or the recent funding that he's got, was limited to, a day's work trying to drop a few things on the floor and compare them with seismic events in the Preston New Road area. So keep on the case, people. It is absolutely essential that Claire Perry does understand that her political future is very much on the line here. Greg Clark has effectively distanced himself from this. He's put Claire Perry out there on point, and she must be constantly reminded, because she appears to have relatively short memory, constantly reminded that basically her political career will be well and truly over if she compromises the established limits, which of course Quadrilla were party to establishing some years ago. Elsewhere, of course, they are drilling at Misson Springs in North Nottinghamshire. So if you're up in the eastern side of the Pennines, then there's 3 locations right now which need some attention. That's West Newton, where Rathlin Energy have returned to drill another well at West Newton A. That's just to the north of Hull. And then Misson Springs in North Nottinghamshire, and then Biscathorpe in Lincolnshire. And it's very much, the local communities here that are going to determine whether or not these activities progress. Now, I know we have an injunction in place, of course, in Misson Springs, but hey, just needs a little bit of creativity, doesn't it, really? Now, across the other side of the Pennines, partway through the public inquiry, the appeal against Cheshire West and Chester City Council's refusal to grant planning permission for iGas to return to the well site at Ellesmere Port. And yesterday, apparently, the inquiry turned around a little bit, and a couple of the expert witnesses there certainly gave the iGas barrister a run for his money. And it seems that Brian Cook, who of course is famously acknowledged that he's a former colleague of the iGas solicitor, so safe pair of hands, I guess. But nonetheless, it would seem that yesterday's evidence certainly had an impact. So there's a call out from the people of the Cheshire anti-fracking community, and if you are in the Chester area and you're able to get along to the inquiry, even if you're only able to step in for an hour or so, then the average public gallery's been apparently 50 each day. And, it just needs more people to clearly demonstrate that, this is something that concerns them sufficiently to take time out to actually go and witness the proceedings as they unfold in this iGas appeal. Now, remember, this well site at Ellesmere Port is the closest well site in the country to residential properties, just 320 metres. And it's also the closest well site to a town centre. So, if that gets approval, then unfortunately that sets a very, very significant and untenable precedent where these gas companies could say, well, hey, we're doing it in Ellesmere Port, so why can't we do it in, anywhere in Yorkshire or elsewhere in Lancashire or down in the southeast for that matter. So this is a very, very important inquiry. So what else is occurring? Well, tomorrow, Mark Steele is due back in court to, this is the appeal against the criminal conviction that he received last year for allegedly threatening 2 councillors. It was a bit of a travesty. Unfortunately, the judge didn't seem comfortable in her own skin, and went with an establishment decision. But that decision is now being appealed. Now there is, I believe, a request in to adjourn this hearing. So, please check either my Facebook pages or Mark's Facebook pages or Twitter to establish whether or not that case is going ahead tomorrow morning. And obviously that would have details of the court as well. So we'll give an update as soon as we know. And the reason I can't tell you definitively is because apparently the computer system in the courts was down in the Newcastle area yesterday. So the court administrators weren't able to confirm one way or another whether the hearing was going to go ahead or be adjourned. So, meanwhile, the reality is that the establishment, the global corporatists and their puppet politicians are working on the basis that the British people are so dumbed down, that they are so apathetic that they can, create a little bit of drama, which they'll publish in the national press to convince the gullible masses that they're actually doing their best to take care of their interests, when of course the opposite is true. And the onus is on each and every one of us to make it very clear to those who take money out of the public purse that it is our interests, the wider interests of the British population, that they need to be taken account of, and not the interests of their paymasters. Even though obviously they know damn well that if they do what their paymasters say, then there's a nice, cushy, sinecure job awaiting for them when they get kicked out of office. But, there's something else that they need to start taking account of, and that's karma. Because they're going to have to not only live with the consequences of the decisions that they make, but they're going to have to deal with them and answer for them at some future date. So, let's just hope that somewhere deep in their soul, they know what to do, they know what's the right thing to do, and they can put aside their attachment to the material trappings of office and do the right thing. And it's up to us to help them do that. So thanks for joining me again this morning. If the court case in Newcastle does go ahead, then I hope to be there tomorrow, although right now I'm stuck in Devon as I wait for the alternator to be replaced on my vehicle. Unfortunately, the mileage that I clock in a year does put my 18-year-old Rover under some stress. So anyway, I'll keep you posted via Facebook and via Twitter, and otherwise I will catch with you, if not outside the courts tomorrow morning, or tomorrow afternoon rather, after the hearing, then on Friday morning at 8:30. So you have a great day, and the sun's really coming out nicely now. The rain clouds have cleared, so who knows, I might just get the deck chair out for a little while. Have a great day, and I'll catch you on Friday.